The whine in my hand climbed to a frantic pitch, a thin, electronic scream in the dead silence of Leo's office. I didn't need to look at the needle on the homemade meter. I could feel the truth in that sound. It was the same frequency of wrongness I'd spent a lifetime learning to hear. I knelt, the cold of the polished concrete floor seeping through my trousers. My pocket screwdriver fit the vent cover screws perfectly. With 2 twists, the grate came loose. There, nestled in the dust, was a tiny black plastic eye, a store-bought transmitter, cheap, sloppy, disrespectful. I didn't react. My face felt like stone. I placed it on the floor and swept the detector again, a lower, persistent hum from behind the monitor. I peeled back the cabling. A second device, taped with clear adhesive, then a third, its signal a faint pulse from the soil of the potted fern in the corner. 15 minutes, 3 bugs. Someone had turned my son's world into an open book. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I need to know this story is reaching the right people. The 2 devices sat on Leo's polished desk like dead insects. One, a tiny black rectangle, was nestled inside the base of his desk lamp. The other, a sleek USB drive, had been plugged into the back of his monitor hub. I'd laid them out on a static-free cloth, my homemade EMF detector beside them, its needle still twitching faintly from residual current. Leo walked in, his shoulders slumped, the air of defeat clinging to him like a bad smell. He didn't even see them at first. "The deal's dead. Vance undercut us by 20%. He knew our numbers, Silas. He knew our bottom line." "He did," I said, my voice flat. I pointed to the desk. His eyes followed my finger. Confusion, then a slow, dawning horror washed over his face. The color drained from it, leaving 2 spots of high, angry red on his cheeks. He understood immediately. The client meetings that had suddenly gone cold, the proposals that seemed to be anticipated, the private strategy talks that leaked. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't him losing his edge. "He was in my head," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. Then it hardened into something cold and sharp. "He was in my office." He snatched his phone from his pocket, his thumb jabbing at the screen. He put it on speaker, the dial tone a harsh, digital pulse in the sterile room. 2 rings, then a voice smooth as oiled glass. "Leo, back so soon? I heard the presentation didn't go optimally." "Vance," Leo's knuckles were white around the phone. "I just found some interesting hardware. In my lamp. In my computer." A beat of silence, then a soft, condescending chuckle. "Come on, Leo. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? This isn't a spy novel. Maybe you're just stressed. The market's brutal. It makes people paranoid." I watched the analog meter. It clicked just once. A spike on the line. A lie. "Paranoid?" Leo spat the word. "I have them right in front of me." "Store-bought junk, probably," Vance sighed, the picture of weary reason. "Any disgruntled intern could plant that trash. You should look at your own team, your own processes. Maybe the failures are closer to home. Maybe you're just not built for this new landscape, Leo. All that old-school integrity, it's a bottleneck." The threat was there, velvet-wrapped. Market realities. Leo's fury was a silent, vibrating thing. "We're done talking."
"We are," Vance agreed, his tone shifting from faux concern to a quiet, icy finality. "Remember, Leo, in this game, the most advanced tool wins. You can't compete with ghosts." The line went dead. Leo lowered the phone. He looked from the devices to my clunky, whining detector with its exposed wires and analog face. The old and the new sitting side by side on the glass desk. "He thinks he's a ghost," Leo said finally. I picked up my detector, the warmth of the old vacuum tubes a comfort against my palm. "Ghosts," I said, "make electromagnetic noise, and I know how to listen." The hum of the HVAC was the only sound in the room for a full 10 seconds after Vance finished speaking. I felt the words land like physical blows, each one precisely targeted. My hand, resting on the cold aluminum casing of my detector, tightened. The needle on the analog meter gave a sympathetic twitch. He stood there in his tailored suit, a slick, polished smile not quite reaching his eyes. Maya, Leo's COO, shifted uncomfortably in her chair by the glass wall. Ben, the junior manager, looked like he wanted to vanish into the industrial carpet. My son Leo was rigid beside me, his jaw a hard line. Vance had come to clear the air, he'd said. All he'd done was poison it. "A cute toy," Vance repeated, nodding toward the device I'd built. It was a gutted 1970s Hallicrafters receiver, its innards resoldered and repurposed, a crude telescoping antenna protruding from its side. To him, it was a museum piece. To me, it was a truth-teller. "Look, Leo, I get it. The market's volatile. You've had some tough losses on those bids. It's easier to blame a ghost than to look at your own spreadsheets." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the edge of Leo's minimalist desk. "But bringing in Dad and his science project, that's a new low. Maybe if you'd been taught real business instead of how to play with old radios, you wouldn't need conspiracy theories." The sterile office air turned to ice. I heard the sharp intake of Leo's breath. That was the flaw, the exact pressure point, my isolation, my world of circuits and solder that to Vance was just play, that I had, in his view, failed my son by giving him that instead of something real. I didn't look at Leo. I couldn't. The shame was a hot coil in my gut. Instead, I watched Vance. I watched the way his eyes flicked, just for a millisecond, to the sleek, abstract painting on the wall behind Leo's desk. Not to the painting itself, but to a spot just below its frame. A spot where the drywall would be. A spot where, in my own preliminary sweep yesterday, I'd noted a slight, almost imperceptible temperature differential with my hand. A cold spot, in a room constantly bathed in warm, forced air. Vance was overconfident. He relied on store-bought, high-tech gear, the kind that syncs to an app, that has a sleek charging case, the kind that needs a power source. "You're right about one thing, Vance," I said, my voice sounding like gravel after the long silence. It was the first time I'd spoken since he entered. "I do know old radios." I flipped the toggle switch on the side of my detector. A low, hungry whine emanated from its speaker, a sound of pure analog amplification searching for a signal. They listen, just like modern ones do. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping softly. I ignored everyone, my entire being focused on the meter and the whine. I took 2 steps toward the painting. The whine climbed in pitch, thinning to a razor's edge. The needle on the meter, which had been lazily bouncing with the room's ambient EM field, jumped. It slammed against the pin at the far right of its arc with a definitive click. I turned slowly, the whining detector now pointed directly at Vance. The needle didn't budge, it stayed pinned. "But you're wrong about the toy," I said, the whine underlining my words. "This doesn't pick up ghosts, Vance. It picks up transmitters, high-frequency, pulsed digital ones, the kind they sell in expensive espionage catalogs." I glanced at the spot below the painting, then back to his face. I saw the first crack, a tiny tick under his left eye. The slick smile froze. The kind that would need a nearby power source, a battery, one that would run cold during continuous operation in a warm room. The color drained from Vance's face. It was no longer about mocking me or my son. It was about the physics, the undeniable analog truth of a needle pinned to a stop. The offer was delivered with a smile that didn't reach Vance's eyes. A number, spoken aloud in this glass box of an office, that was so insultingly low it wasn't an offer. It was a coronation. He leaned back in Leo's guest chair, steepling his fingers. "It's a lifeline, Leo, given the current trajectory of your operations." I watched my son's face. I saw the exact moment he recognized the figure. It was the projected quarterly loss, the one from the stolen forecast model, plus a punitive discount. His shoulders, usually set with a stubborn hope, didn't just slump. They folded. The light in his eyes, the one that had always burned a little too bright for the practical world, guttered and went out. He looked at the floor, at the sterile gray carpet, and said nothing. The hum of the HVAC was the only sound, a mechanical sigh. Vance mistook the silence for consideration. "Think about your team. A soft landing. It's the responsible thing." That's when I knew. This wasn't business. This was a predator who'd caught the scent of blood in the water. He'd used my son's own mind, his own data, to calculate the precise amount of pressure needed to snap his spirit. Reason was a language Vance didn't speak. Appeals to decency were just static to him, background noise to be filtered out. He operated on a different frequency entirely, one of pure, calculated advantage. My hand went to the canvas tool bag at my feet. My fingers brushed against cold metal and rough solder joints. The electromagnetic field detector, my gutted shortwave receiver with its crude antenna, was inert, but it was a listening device of a different kind. It had heard the truth in the electronic whispers of this room. Now, I had to make Vance hear a truth he couldn't ignore. Leo finally looked up, not at Vance, but at me. There was no anger there, just a hollow exhaustion. It was a look that said he was already defeated. Vance followed his gaze, his slick smile turning condescending as it landed on me. "Silas, I'm sure you've advised him to be prudent." I didn't answer him. I kept my eyes on Leo. "He didn't guess this number, son," I said, my voice flat, a diagnostic tone. "He didn't deduce it. He read it. From your own servers. The same way he's been reading everything." Vance's smile froze, then reconfigured into a mask of amused pity. "Old-timer, you've been watching too many spy thrillers. This is the real world. Data analytics, market sensing." I reached into the bag and pulled the detector out. It was an ugly thing, a Frankenstein's monster of old radio parts, and a small, trembling analog meter. I flipped a toggle switch. It emitted a low, hungry whine from its small speaker, a sound that seemed to eat the sterile silence of the office. Vance stared at it, his brow furrowing slightly at this analog absurdity in his digital kingdom. "This is a broad-spectrum RF detector," I said, holding it up. "Home-built. It doesn't care about firewalls or encryption. It listens for the physical leakage, the electronic heartbeat of a transmitter." I began to slowly pan the device around the room. The whine remained a constant background drone until I pointed the bundled wire antenna directly at Vance. The meter needle jumped, scraping against the pin. The whine spiked into a sharp, insistent click, whine, click, whine. Vance's eyes flickered to the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket. A tiny, almost imperceptible tick. "That's ridiculous. My phone, my car key fob." "A key fob transmits a millisecond burst on 315 or 433 megahertz," I stated, taking a slow step toward him. The clicking grew more frantic. "This is a continuous, low-power carrier wave, the signature of a live audio bug, probably a VHF transmitter, poorly shielded, store-bought, expensive but crude." I took another step. The needle was pinned. "You're broadcasting right now, to a recorder in your car, or to a cloud server via a relay." The color drained from Vance's face, his overconfidence evaporating like a mist. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the device, at the physical, undeniable proof clicking and whining in the air between us. He had underestimated the old-timer. He'd thought his technology was invisible. He never considered I wouldn't try to fight it in the digital realm, but in the physical one, in the very air he was polluting with his theft. The soldering iron hissed against the circuit board, a tiny plume of acrid smoke rising in the still air of my workshop. Across the cluttered bench, the gutted shortwave receiver, my electromagnetic field detector, lay open like a patient on an operating table. "It's scheduled," Leo's voice came through the speakerphone, tinny and tense. 10 a.m. tomorrow. The full pitch. Vance's people confirmed they'll be dialing in remotely. Good. I didn't look up. My focus was on the delicate wiring. The original meter, with its satisfying click and whine near active electronics, was no longer enough. We needed proof, not just of a signal, but of the crime itself. "He'll be listening. He can't resist. His type never can." I had already spliced in a sensitive voice-activated audio recorder scavenged from an old answering machine. Its tiny cassette would capture everything said in that glass-walled office. But that only gave us one half of the equation. We needed the other. "What are you doing to it?" Leo asked. "Giving him an echo," I said, my words short and precise. I was attaching a secondary transmitter, a low-power, single-frequency unit I'd built years ago from a kit. It was crude, but perfectly traceable. "This will broadcast a faint carrier signal, on a very specific frequency. It won't interfere with his bug. It'll just ride along." The plan was a closed loop, an electronic tautology. Vance's hidden device would transmit our pitch to him. My modified detector would not only find his bug by its RF signature, but my added transmitter would simultaneously broadcast a silent signal back to a receiver I would hide. That receiver would be connected to a second recorder. We would have the pitch from the room, and, if my calculations were correct, we would also capture the distinct sound of that data being received and downloaded on Vance's end, a perfect, recorded chain of custody, from our mouths to his bug to his computer. "It has to be tomorrow, Silas," Leo said, his voice dropping. "The board is getting restless. If this pitch doesn't secure the bridge funding, I understand the stakes." I finally put the iron down, examining my work. The detector was now a Frankenstein's monster of analog and digital, a tangle of wires and intent. The original analog meter was still prominent, its needle dormant. The weakness is his confidence. He thinks his store-bought encrypted gear is invisible. He doesn't understand that every transmission leaves a fingerprint, even a silent one. This, I tapped the new transmitter coil, is just making that fingerprint glow in the dark. I spent the next hour calibrating. The office's constant HVAC hum was a complicating factor, a blanket of noise. I adjusted the sensitivity, aiming for the sharper digital spike of Vance's device hiding within that analog drone. It was like tuning an ear to hear a specific whisper in a roaring wind. By the time I finished, the winter sky outside my window was black. The device sat on the bench, inert but potent. Tomorrow it would go to work in that sterile glass room. It would listen, it would lure, and if everything went according to the laws of physics, it would entrap a man who believed his technology made him untouchable. I powered it down. The workshop fell silent, save for the persistent low-frequency hum of the city itself. A reminder that in the modern world, you are never truly off the air. The numbers on the analog meter didn't lie. From my makeshift command post in the back of Leo's delivery van, parked 3 stories below his glass-walled conference room, I watched the needle tremble. The constant, low-grade hum of the building's electronics was a flat green line on the portable oscilloscope I'd rigged next to the EMF detector. But then, a spike. A sharp, rhythmic pulse superimposed on the hum, synchronized with Leo's voice coming through my headphones. The color drained from Vance's face, his overconfidence evaporating like a mist. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the device, at the physical, undeniable proof clicking and whining in the air between us. He had underestimated the old-timer. He'd thought his technology was invisible. He never considered I wouldn't try to fight it in the digital realm, but in the physical one, in the very air he was polluting with his theft. The soldering iron hissed against the circuit board, a tiny plume of acrid smoke rising in the still air of my workshop. Across the cluttered bench, the gutted shortwave receiver, my electromagnetic field detector, lay open like a patient on an operating table. "It's scheduled," Leo's voice came through the speakerphone, tinny and tense. 10 a.m. tomorrow, the full pitch. Vance's people confirmed they'll be dialing in remotely. Good. I didn't look up. My focus was on the delicate wiring. The original meter, with its satisfying click and whine near active electronics, was no longer enough. We needed proof, not just of a signal, but of the crime itself. He'll be listening. He can't resist. His type never can. I had already spliced in a sensitive, voice-activated audio recorder scavenged from an old answering machine. Its tiny cassette would capture everything said in that glass-walled office. But that only gave us one half of the equation. We needed the other. "What are you doing to it?" Leo asked. "Giving him an echo," I said, my words short and precise. I was attaching a secondary transmitter, a low-power, single-frequency unit I'd built years ago from a kit. It was crude but perfectly traceable. This will broadcast a faint carrier signal. On a very specific frequency, it won't interfere with his bug. It'll just ride along. The plan was a closed loop, an electronic tautology. Vance's hidden device would transmit our pitch to him. My modified detector would not only find his bug by its RF signature, but my added transmitter would simultaneously broadcast a silent signal back to a receiver I would hide. That receiver would be connected to a second recorder. We would have the pitch from the room, and if my calculations were correct, we would also capture the distinct sound of that data being received and downloaded on Vance's end. A perfect recorded chain of custody, from our mouths to his bug to his computer. "It has to be tomorrow, Silas," Leo said, his voice dropping. "The board is getting restless if this pitch doesn't secure the bridge funding." I understand the stakes. I finally put the iron down, examining my work. The detector was now a Frankenstein's monster of analog and digital, a tangle of wires and intent. The original analog meter was still prominent, its needle dormant. The weakness is his confidence. He thinks his store-bought, encrypted gear is invisible. He doesn't understand that every transmission leaves a fingerprint, even a silent one. This, I tapped the new transmitter coil, is just making that fingerprint glow in the dark. I spent the next hour calibrating. The office's constant HVAC hum was a complicating factor, a blanket of noise. I adjusted the sensitivity, aiming for the sharper digital spike of Vance's device hiding within that analog drone. It was like tuning an ear to hear a specific whisper in a roaring wind. By the time I finished, the winter sky outside my window was black. The device sat on the bench, inert but potent. Tomorrow, it would go to work in that sterile glass room. It would listen. It would lure. And if everything went according to the laws of physics, it would entrap a man who believed his technology made him untouchable. I powered it down. The workshop fell silent, save for the persistent low-frequency hum of the city itself, a reminder that in the modern world, you are never truly off the air. The numbers on the analog meter didn't lie. From my makeshift command post in the back of Leo's delivery van, parked 3 stories below his glass-walled conference room, I watched the needle tremble. The constant low-grade hum of the building's electronics was a flat green line on the portable oscilloscope I'd rigged next to the EMF detector. But then, a spike. A sharp, rhythmic pulse superimposed on the hum, synchronized with Leo's voice coming through my headphones. The click of the meter was the only sound in the room for a full 3 seconds after I finished speaking. Vance's face, a mask of smug confidence just moments ago, had gone pale, then flushed. He took a half-step back, his eyes darting from the whining device in my hand to the faces of Maya, Ben, and the 2 security guards who had edged into the doorway. This is fabricated," he blurted out, the slickness gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, panicked edge. He pointed a trembling finger at my detector. "That thing is a prop. You built it to frame me." I didn't move. I just let the antenna drift slightly in his direction. The meter's needle jumped again, a sympathetic vibration to the lie. "It's not a prop, Vance. It's a broadband receiver tuned to sniff out parasitic oscillations. The bug you planted in Leo's conference room phone isn't just transmitting audio. It's a digital unit, broadcasting on a very specific licensed UHF frequency back to a recording server." I kept my voice flat, technical, the same tone I'd used to explain a circuit diagram. "Expensive gear, the kind you lease from Apex Corporate Security Solutions. Top of the line, very quiet." I saw Maya's eyes narrow. She knew the name. It was Vance's company. "So what?" Vance spat, trying to reclaim some bravado. "Lots of firms use Apex." "They do," I agreed, nodding slowly. "And every Apex system has a unique digital identifier, embedded in its carrier wave, a serial number for all intents and purposes. It's a feature, not a bug, for diagnostics. I paused, letting the implication hang. I used a software-defined radio dongle, $30 online, to capture that identifier from the transmission. It took me 6 hours last night to demodulate and decode it. The identifier is registered to Apex account number 4487-229B. The billing address for that account is your home in Cherry Creek. The point of contact email is vance@apex-corp-esec.com. I hadn't raised my voice. I simply stated the facts, one after another, like connecting components on a breadboard. Each one clipped the wrong wire in Vance's defense. "My device," I said, finally lifting the humming, cobbled-together box of vintage parts, "is just a canary in a coal mine. It tells me something is there. It doesn't leave a trail. It's just junk. But your system?" I looked directly at him, exploiting the weakness I'd calculated. "You bought the system with the digital fingerprint. You thought the tech made you untouchable. It's what made you traceable." The logic was a closed circuit, irrefutable. Ben was staring, open-mouthed. The security guards had fully entered the room, their postures shifting from curious to authoritative. Maya's expression was one of cold, furious clarity. All of them were staring at Vance, who had run out of words. He just stood there, his expensive suit seeming to hang off him suddenly, his eyes wide with the realization that his high-tech wall had just been scaled by an old man with a box of scraps. The sterile office air felt charged, not with the hum of the HVAC, but with the silent crashing wave of his defeat. The article was short, clinical, just 3 paragraphs in the tech section of the Denver Business Journal. Vance Solutions, a local data security firm, is reportedly under investigation by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for alleged corporate espionage. Sources indicate the inquiry stems from a complaint filed by rival firm Stratus Analytics. Several of Vance Solutions' key clients have since terminated their contracts, citing breach of trust. The company could not be reached for comment. I read it on my phone, standing in my workshop. The hum of a vacuum tube power supply on the bench was the only sound. I felt nothing. No triumph, no relief. Just the cold verification of a circuit completing itself. A logical outcome confirmed. Later that afternoon, I drove. I didn't tell Leo. He was busy, finally secure, rebuilding his client lists with a renewed, ferocious confidence. I parked across the street from a row of bland, beige rental storage units and small office suites on the outskirts of the city. I didn't get out. I saw him. Vance. He was alone. The sleek black sedan was gone, replaced by a common silver SUV. He was moving cardboard boxes from a dolly into the back of it. His movements were sharp, efficient, but there was a frantic energy to them. The perfectly tailored suit was replaced by khakis and a polo shirt. He looked smaller. The glass walls of his sterile empire were now the corrugated metal door of Unit 114. He never looked up. He just worked, loading the physical remnants of his company, probably liquidation assets. The expensive store-bought jammers, the redundant servers, the minimalist furniture that now wouldn't fit. I watched until he slammed the SUV's tailgate shut. The sound was a dull thud, swallowed by the vast parking lot. He got in the driver's seat, sat there for a full minute, staring at nothing. Then he started the engine and drove away, not toward the tech district, but toward the highway leading out of town. I turned my own ignition, The click of the key, the rumble of the engine, these were familiar analog sounds. I didn't follow him. There was no point. The investigation was a closed loop. The feedback had been eliminated. Vance had been so confident his digital, high-noise methods were invisible. He never considered the old, quiet paths, the resonant frequencies of malice. He underestimated the clarity of a simple, tuned circuit and the patience of someone who speaks their language. As I drove home, the Colorado sky wide and impersonal above me, I thought of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's always there, full of whispers and screams, most of it ignored. You just have to know how to listen. And sometimes, you have to know how to make the hidden signal scream so loud that everyone can finally hear it. The detector sat on the shelf by the window, a silent, ugly trophy. Its exposed copper coil and the cracked bakelite casing of the old shortwave receiver looked completely out of place among Leo's sleek glass and brushed steel, but it belonged there. It had earned its spot. I watched my son. He was on the phone, one hand gesturing sharply as he spoke to a client, his voice a steady, confident stream. The brittle tension that had held him rigid for weeks was gone. The office, once a sterile, echoing box of anxiety, felt different. The low hum of the HVAC was just a hum again, not a carrier wave for paranoia. I turned my gaze to the window. Denver's tech district glittered below, a forest of glass and ambition. Out there were 100 Vances, armed with the latest encrypted gadgets, believing their newness made them invisible. They saw a world of obsolete parts, of forgotten knowledge. They were wrong. The moral of this wasn't something Leo would say aloud, and I certainly wouldn't. It hummed in the space between us, as clear as the signal my detector had pulled from the air. Obsolescence is a lie. It's a story sold to make you doubt what you already hold in your hands. Vance's expensive store-bought snooper was already outdated the day he bought it. My tool was built from salvage, from understanding. It was timeless. A right tool in the right hands doesn't age. It waits. Leo finished his call and came to stand beside me, following my look out at the city. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Instead, he put a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it firm and real. It was a better signal than any I'd intercepted all week. "Coffee?" he asked. "The real stuff, from the pot downstairs." I nodded. "Sounds right." We left the office, the door locking with a solid, satisfying thunk behind us. The detector remained on the shelf, watching over the quiet, secure room. Its work was done. Ours, for now, was just beginning.